we're going to talk about Mod A first. So we're going to go through the syllabus. I'm so sorry. We're going to get a bit too deep and overanalyze textual conversations. We're going to talk about comparative analyses and just kind of some language and structure things, and then get into study techniques. So welcome to Mod A, textual conversations. So this is Mod A. I feel like compared to other subjects, the syllabus is so broad and just not as useful, but there's definitely keywords from this that are really going to help you. And I really recommend have the syllabus when you're kind of like writing up draft essays, have the syllabus open next to you as you're going through editing, and use the words specifically from the syllabus, because this is where they're getting the questions from. Like, this is all that they can use to write a question. Like, this is what they have. So that's always going to be the base, and I think that's why syllabus work is so important. Some of the most important things I think that really come up are resonances and dissonances, which are just similarities and differences. Reimagining or reframing, how the text might mirror, align, or collide. And that's where, again, all of this is really just saying the texts are reimagined or reframed, and because of that, they have similarities and differences. And then you can understand how the different composers are influenced by context and values, and how this shapes meaning. This first paragraph tells you everything. I think that the Mod A question, a lot of the time, don't get me wrong, I'm like hating on every module. I don't like Mod A either. I don't really like Mod A either, but I'm still a bit scarred because in my HSC, they gave us a specific extract from the text. Like, they gave us an extract from Hagseed and an extract from Tempest. And I was like, what's going on here? So I'm still a bit scarred from that. But the question itself came, like, the actual question, other than the stimulus, came from this entire paragraph. And most questions that I have seen from other past trials, but also HSC papers, are coming from this. I actually don't think I've ever seen a question that has not involved like at least two of these words. A lot of the time it's going to use this wording, so I think it's really important to have that embedded throughout. Context is so big in Mod A, and context is the answer to everything, but we're going to talk about that. But that is a bit of the module. I know that it's literally how we feel. Anyways, resonances and similarities. Resonances are similarities and dissonances are differences. So instead of saying similarities and differences, just to spice up your language a bit, say the resonances between the text include, and put that, because it just sounds better than the similarities are. And then reimagining and reframing is just all about the textual appropriation and why it's appropriated. Common or disparate issues are themes or ideas that appear in one text or both. So a lot of the time the themes will be the same in the both texts, but they'll just appear differently. Even though they're like Tempest looks at this, Hagseed looks at this, they're gonna be portrayed in different lights, even though it's the same theme. For example, like forgiveness in both of them. And then context is the influence of the society in which the text was produced, and your text both shapes and is shaped by context. And the context, you can go into historical context, political context, social and literary context. I always really focused on historical and social. I think definitely the most was social, but it's great to go into the other contexts as well. So the key takeaways is I don't know why they all say one. What are the similarities and differences between your texts? How has context influenced both texts? What is the purpose of appropriating text? And then what is the value of a comparative study? Those are the big questions that Module A is asking of you, and the main takeaways. So I think what's very important is probably this one here: how has context influenced both texts? No matter what essay question you get, you will always be talking about the influence of context. And context is what influences the similarities and differences. A lot of time, context is the purpose that the second author is appropriating it, because a lot of the time the purpose of appropriating the text is to fit that second text into the modern context or the context of that author's time. And the value of the comparative study is to see the differences and the resonances and dissonances between the two texts. So all of it kind of like intertwines, and that's one thing that I think makes Mod A bit easier, is that a lot of these questions and the takeaway in the actual syllabus module itself is all very interlinked. So these are all analysis questions, and these are thesis kind of statements and kind of things that you'll look at more in your thesis. So writing a Band 6 essay, you need a solid thesis, and you also need a solid topic sentence. Some ideas that really work well are to confront conflicting perspectives on universal ideas, to showcase the power of language to reshape context, to articulate the necessity of renewing art to make canonical text accessible, to critique the canonical status of text. I know how to say that word, I promise. To highlight how themes transcend time. So if you are watching live, this is one that I'd want to screenshot or just take a pic of, only because these are definitely steals. Steal it and add it to your essay. But these are kind of just some thesis ideas that really weave into all different questions that you can get. And no matter what, they're never really going to change. So I really recommend just having a really strong thesis that you can then go in and just kind of add a couple words from the question to. This is the end game, and these are the different types of questions that you can encounter. So we've got this question, which is a HSC question. Everything is being dismantled, reconstructed, recycled. To what end, for what purpose? And then a to what extent question. This one is also to what extent. Number one, I know you all know it, but if it ever says to what extent, you need to say the extent. If you don't say the extent, you have not answered the question. Even if you've implied it, you need to say to a high extent, to a low extent, to a significant extent, whatever. We need to all be saying the extent, guys. But I want to look at this question first. So everything is being dismantled, reconstructed, recycled. To what end, for what purpose? All that means is that the second text is being taken apart, it's being reconstructed, so it's being made into something new, and then there's obviously it's different, so it's reconstructed, but also recycled, so it's also kind of being reused, and there's similarities. So to what end, for what purpose? So all that is, it's just saying the second text, like the first text gets taken apart, there's going to be similarities with that as it's recycled, but there's also going to be differences with it as it's reconstructed. To what end, for what purpose? So really, even though it doesn't have those specific words, it's actually just a resonance and dissonance question. And to what end is just the extent. So is it really similar and are there a lot of similarities and differences? Are there only a couple? And for what purpose is just to make it suitable and align and more relevant for the respective context of the second author. Because a lot of the time, that's why they're writing it. Why would you take a text from the 1600s and rewrite it? But like rewrite it in like such a modern way. Like it's just such a good thesis to say that it's so that it can be relevant and increase the understanding of universal truths in the contemporary context where we're spicing up. Anyways, the next question is this one, and this is, I wanted to put in this one because this shocked a lot of people, and a lot of people came out of it and were like, damn, that's not what I wanted to write. And this is what they can do, because a lot of the times you'll get a statement like this and you'll be like, yeah, that's so true. I don't actually think I've ever said to a low extent in English other than this question. But I am preparing you guys for everything. I will not let you get into that exam room and be shocked. So this was I think the 2020 HSC. In textual conversations, the later text is often seen as a shadow, lacking the originality and power of the earlier. That's basically saying that your second text is just in the background. It's not original and it has no power. So it's just bad. And a lot of people, because they're so used to saying yes and saying like a high extent, they said that this was true. But for most texts, I'd say 99% of the time, that is not true. It's not a shadow. The later text is not a shadow. I'd actually say that the later text is a spotlight on the future. It doesn't lack originality, because if it lacked originality, there wouldn't be differences. Like, how could it be original? Like, if every text is going to have their similarities and differences, if it was just a carbon copy, then yeah, it lacks originality, but none of them are carbon copies. There's so many differences between your first and second text. So you can't say, oh, it lacks originality. And saying it lacks power means that like it just has no purpose, has no meaning. But again, why would it be on the HSC list if it didn't? Like, why would they put those two texts together? Why is that like an appropriation of it? How did it get published? Like, this just doesn't make sense. So I definitely, if you do try this question, you're gonna be arguing to a low extent for this one. And you'd say that it doesn't lack originality because of the dissonances, and that's what makes it authentic, and that the power is strengthened by the reimagining of the similarity. So a lot of the times there will be similar themes, similar characters, but they're just reimagined in a new light, so that they can be portrayed for the modern context with modern values and reflecting our contemporary context. All of it, guys, everything I say is going to sound like a little recycle, but it's all the same. I feel like Mod A, I don't want to sound like I like it, but in that sense, I think it's a lot more predictable than Mod B, which we're getting to next. Anyways, then is example C, which I want to cry. They'll give you they'll give you a like section from the text. This one is actually an intertextuality of Hag Seed and Tempest, but other times they'll give you like one extract from your first text, one extract from your second text, and then they'll have still a general question. So they've got explain the centrality of the motif of performance in the textual conversation between Shakespeare's The Tempest and Margaret Atwood's Hag Seed. So if you do get this question, a lot of the time the question is, okay, what do I do with that? Like, do I have to bring up that quote in every single paragraph? No. You'd use that quote and you would analyze it, but then you'd link, they still tell you the centrality of the motif of performance. So you'd find a way to talk about that motif of performance and kind of waffle that into your own quotes. But this is probably one of the only times where they can throw you off in Mod A. I don't like talking about this because it is very rare that, even if they do this, it's very rare that they do it like this, where they first will give you a specific extract, but they'll also give you like a specific kind of theme and or technique. And here they're talking about the motif of performance. It's much more common in HSC and trials to get something like this because that aligns more with the module. But that doesn't mean that they can't do this. And I didn't want to do this lecture and you guys leave it and you're like, yay, I love Mod A. I'm so ready for Mod A. And then you go in on the day and this is the first time you see something like this. I think exposure is so important. And something that I really recommend is to look at the hardest possible questions ever. I do it to all my tutoring students, but I also was like that with myself, where I would expose myself to just more difficult questions. And like I tried this question before I did my HSC so that I was ready for in case I had to disagree with it. And I think the more questions that you see, you just feel more ready for it. And then on the day of your trials and on the day of your HSC, you won't be as thrown off because you've seen it. If you go into the HSC or your trials and you see a question with the extract, you won't have to be as thrown off because you already know, okay, well, they've done this before and you've already seen harder. So it's cruel to yourself. I feel like it's low-key mean to stress yourself out with hard questions, but in the long term, you'll just feel a bit more confident on the day. And a lot of the time, you'll find your trials in HSC easier than you expected or than you anticipated because you've challenged yourself in the study period. It's not a must, but mentally for me, that really worked. But in saying that, I still got so upset when I saw the extract question because I was just like, no, I want a question like this. These questions are just the dream, but if you do get them, it's completely fine. You'll just refer to it in one of your paragraphs. You don't have to do it multiple times. You don't have to keep linking back to it. It's more about linking to the actual question. You got to remember, if you get an extract, the extract is not the question. That's just a quotation. But even here, it says refer to the quotation, and you can refer to it just once, and your understanding of the prescribed text. And if you want to refer to it in different ways, you can use the house lights dim short syntax. Then you can do jagged yellow lettering on black, The Tempest by William Shakespeare. And then you can do the intertextuality of that quote. You'd still have to find the techniques in that because you are using quotes. So you're going to bring back your common module short answer technique spotting and find techniques. You've hit the jackpot, honestly. If you get an extract question and your quote or a quote that you've memorized is there, I think that's like jackpot. You've just won at life. Like if you memorize one of the quotes you've memorized is also on the question, I just think you win at life, and I manifest that for all of you. But that's the different questions that they can ask you, and that's kind of like a syllabus kind of run through. So for a band 6 in Mod A, clear structure and original analysis is going to do it. I am so big on clear structure only because it is low-key hard. I think the hardest part of Mod A is that you've got like both texts and you're trying to talk about the similarities and difference in both and just going back and forth, and it's the same theme but they look different, but here's how they're also similar. Like there's just so much going on in it, and I think it can get really confusing. But at the end, it's all going to link back to the purpose of the textual conversation, and what you're gaining from it. So I think, and in the marking center, the most popular structure for a band 6 is an integrated structure, where you're basing your paragraphs on your themes and you're speaking about both texts together. So for example, you'll have your introduction, then you might have your first theme, which is forgiveness, and you're talking about forgiveness in both texts, and then you're having your second theme, I don't know, redemption, and then you're talking about redemption in both texts within the one paragraph. So same theme across both texts, but you're talking about both texts in the one paragraph. I think that's the best structure only because Some students will do like maybe 4 paragraphs, and they'll do 1 paragraph on forgiveness, but in the Tempest, then another paragraph on forgiveness in Hagseed, another paragraph on gender in Tempest, and then a fourth paragraph on gender in Hagseed. And it's not that that's a bad structure, but the only thing is that it's the textual conversation, and the entire module is about how closely connected and how they mirror or collide. And when you separate your paragraphs, it's almost like you're separating the text. But a conversation is two people talking and two things coming together. So it doesn't really make sense to have a module that's about togetherness and then separating your paragraphs. I think if the module is about a conversation which is two-way, then it makes sense to have both in your paragraphs. I feel like that just makes sense, and that is what HSC markers want to see, just to get those marks. Because another thing is, when you're separating the text, it's very easy to talk more about one than the other, and it's much harder when you're separating the text in different paragraphs to connect them on where they mirror and where they collide. While if they're in the same paragraph, you have to jump back and forth, and that forces you. Like, you're physically forced. You don't have a choice. You have to find some type of connection and conversation between them. So this is sample essay structures. I'm sure you guys already have done, a lot of you would have done a mod A essay or exam in class. But these are some themes that you can use for your different texts. I know for Tempest Hagseed personally, I did forgiveness, forgiveness and redemption, and then imprisonment. I did 2, but again, if you want to do 3 paragraphs, completely fine. The key points for the body paragraphs is that you should aim for that integrated structure, and you really want that balanced discussion of text. And what's really important is that you're comparative. So using phrases like similarly, this mirrors, likewise, Pacino mimics this, Atwood mimics this parallels, this harmonizes with, but then on the opposite saying in contrast, jarringly, opposingly, this idea collides with. These are the phrases that are going to help you have that integrated structure. Because you don't want to be like, oh, there's this quote in The Tempest, and then there's this quote in Hagseed. Like, okay, like, you're not actually showing the textual conversation in that way, and that's not how a conversation flows. It's like, hi, how are you? I'm good, how are you? And it's a consistent response. So you want, in the same way, to be using these phrases so that it just flows so concisely. And a lot of the time when students are losing marks on mod A, they're losing marks in the structure. A lot of the time it's going to be structured marks, because you guys know the themes, you guys know the message, you guys know the meaning, but how are you showing the textual conversation? That is where 100% most students are losing marks, and that's a big distinguishment for getting a band 6. The better you can show the textual conversation, and it's much easier to show it when you do have this integrated structure, and when you are balancing it, and when you are using a comparative language, the more likely you are to get full marks. So that is the importance of clear structure. You should go back and forth. It's up to you. Like, I know everyone does different things. Personally, for my mod A essay, I got a 19. Yeah, I got a 19 in my trials, and for my internal in mod A, what I was doing, I was going back and forth. So I do like parent text, child text. So like the original text, and then the later text, and then I'd keep going back and forth. I know other people, and at times I would try for like practice essays, I'd try doing like, okay, these are 3 quotes Tempest, 3 quotes Hagseed, like in order. But I just found that going back and forth, so for example, for my like first paragraph, I had 6 quotes, and I had like a Tempest quote, then a Hagseed quote, then a Tempest quote, then a Hagseed quote, then a Tempest quote, then a Hagseed quote. I feel like by doing that and consistently going back and forth between the quotes, I had no choice but to talk about the textual conversation. Like, I always had to be making the link, otherwise it would have been impossible to go back and forth like that. While when I was doing 3 quotes Tempest and then 3 quotes Hagseed, it was a bit harder. Like, I had to force the connection a bit more, but it still works, and I definitely still recommend that. If that's what you've done, that is completely fine. It's so hard talking about structure in here because everyone's going to do different things, but I think those are definitely the 2 go-tos for it. And if you are going to do the 3 quotes in your first text and then 3 quotes in your second text, just make sure that in your second text you're always just really linking it back, because they don't care. Like, if they wanted to know only about looking for Richard, they would have just given you looking for Richard. If they only wanted to know about Tempest, they would have just given you Tempest. But they give you that second text for a reason, so you want to make sure you're consistently going back to it. So the aim is to compare purpose of similarities and differences here and comment on why that's the case. And context is going to play a really integral role in your analysis. So a lot of the times when you're switching back and forth, if you have like the similarities and differences and you know them between the quotes, it's much easier to kind of go back and forth and have that structure. But those similarities and differences are not only, mostly coming from context. That's why they're so different, because obviously Shakespeare's world in like the 1600s is going to be very different to Atwood's world in 2016. Very different worlds, completely different. And it's like that for a lot of the authors. A lot of the time, there's at least 100 years between when the texts were made. And naturally, so many things, like think about how much things have changed from when like we were little kids in like primary school to now. And now we look at kids, like primary school kids, and we're like, oh, like they're so different. They're so different to what we were like. And our parents look at us like that. And like in such a small time span, things change so quickly, socially, historically, politically, and then also in the literary world with like techniques and experimentation and what's happening and what the most popular writing styles are. So everything is consistently changing, and that's the purpose of the similarities and differences, is to still have that universal truth, because some things and our humanity and the kind of human condition inherently is always going to stay the same, but it just can be portrayed in different ways because of different social and contextual influences. Amazing. So, this is a structure I recommend. So you have a topic sentence, and you can have, again, if you wanted to do this structure instead, where you're going like in sections. So you've got all your quotes from your first text A and then all your quotes from your text B. This is what you would do. So you'd have your topic sentence, then 2 to 3 quotes from your first one, 2 to 3 quotes from your second one, comparison of purpose using context, and you really want to be specific, and then a concluding statement. But I'd say, yeah, minimum 4 quotes for your paragraph, but 4 to 6 is a good range for it. For your analysis, language and form is important. I'm not going to lie, it's much more important in Mod B. And you guys, if you've seen any Mod B questions, form comes up so much, and like language, it's much more just kind of founded in the module, but your analysis is still really important. I've got just an exemplar. If you are doing a film techniques are so important. I know when it's film studies, it's so easy to talk about the techniques of the dialogue and the techniques of the script and to just like use dialogue, but it's really important to use film techniques wherever possible. And here we've got like the sustained close-up, and then bringing in the analysis. I also just wanted to show here, I feel like it's very simple to be like, this is the quote, this is the technique, this is the analysis. But I think in your essays, just to kind of switch it up a bit and sophisticate your essays, it's really nice when you kind of like don't go so like stock standard. So here we've got like the technique first. Then for example, you could have your quote here and then you've got the analysis. So you don't always have to go like, this is the quote, this is the technique, this is the evidence. This is like, you can like switch it up, that the kind of order of it. Of course, your analysis and your link back to the question is always going to go last, but the quote and technique, sometimes I'll put the quote first, but other times I'll introduce the quote and then introduce the technique and then link it to the quote, if that makes sense. But I just wanted to put it out there. And another thing is, sentence starters are very important. It is so easy, and whenever I look over my practice work, I swear every sentence starts with this. This is evident in, this is clear in, this is because, this is due to, like, I feel like it's so easy to start with this. But if we look here, we've got however, then this, then whilst, and then oh, that's it. But you can always start sentences with the author. But I just feel like, yeah, this and the are such easy kind of clauses to start your sentences with, but switching it up will really make a difference for your form. This is a sample of how you can go back and forth. So Shakespeare concludes Prospero's journey with his realization, and then it's got the quote. The rare in action is virtue, not vengeance, which if you are talking about forgiveness, redemption, or revenge in Tempest, because a lot of you guys, Tempest and Looking for Richard and Richard are the two very popular Mod duos. I didn't want to specifically just talk about those because obviously there's other ones as well, and not all of you guys might be studying that, but I assume that most of you guys will be doing that because they're the most commonly assessed texts. But if you are doing Tempest, I really do recommend this quote for those themes. It's just so good. where he utilizes an honest tone and high modality, indicating his new understanding that forgiveness or revenge is liberating. He summarizes his journey and this message of forgiveness and how it can be achieved by signifying morality. Then Atwood translates this epiphanic moment to a quiet moment of reflection, with Felix asking within the rhetorical question. So here we've got the technique first and then the actual text. But if you just see, like, Shakespeare concludes and then Atwood translates, so such a simple phrase and 2 words makes the connection so much nicer. And that she translates this exact moment to this, and just having that direct comparison. And then we've got through the journeys of Prosper and Felix, both texts conversate on how freedom can be achieved through forgiveness. And then just having that both texts and just really having that comparison is very, very important. And that's a comparative analysis. Now, study techniques for Mod A, we're going to talk about it. This is such a controversial topic, only because I have never heard a teacher say, yep, memorize your essay. My teachers were also against it. A lot of teachers I've ever spoken to were against it, and that generally, and HSC market, like, everybody hears it, like, oh, if you memorize, you're not going to do well. I personally, I never memorized an essay word for word, but I did memorize kind of bases, because realistically, you're going to go in with the same quotes every time. You're going to go in with the same quotes. Those quotes are always going to have the same techniques, and the analysis is always going to be the same. Like, people are like, oh no, the analysis changed. No, the analysis of the quote will always mean the exact same thing. The quote, the technique, and the meaning are never going to change. What you prove it to changes. So all you have to take, that quote, technique, and meaning can entirely be memorized, and then you're just going to link that to whatever the question is. So already those 3, which is essentially the bulk of your paragraphs and all your evidence, can be completely memorized, and there's nothing wrong with that because it's going to be the same anyways. So I don't really understand that argument, because I'm like, why would you not? Obviously it's great to understand it, but like, realistically, even if you don't realize you're memorizing it, a lot of the time we are. Your topic sentences and your thesis, I would also memorize those. I would have to change those. Like, obviously you can't use it word for word, but most of the time you can use it pretty close to it, and you're just going to add a couple extra words. So for example, we've got, what I would do, I would write a base, and I've made a TikTok about this, so I'm not sure if any of you guys have seen it, but I would write like a base essay, and I'd kind of have just a really general essay, because realistically, even though you're getting different questions, you're always arguing your same meaning. Your topic sentences never really change that much. You're not going to go in and just argue a completely different paragraph that you like have never written before. That very rarely happens. The message of your text or the message about your theme doesn't change. The theme itself, the message about your theme, and the argument that you're making about that theme, your quotes, technique, and your analysis never change. They're always going to stay the same. You're just going to prove that to different points. So the only thing that changes is the link. That's the only thing that you can't prepare for, which is why I never memorized my essays word for word, because I always got scared that if I memorized every single word, like down to the core, there was no way that I'd link in the question. But because I memorized my topic sentences, which had my arguments that never changed, and then my quotes, technique, and analysis, what was left was space to then add in the question. So I memorized enough to the point where I had enough to write about, and I had some really good prepared work to go in with, but it wasn't too much that I didn't have the space to add in. Because you don't want to memorize like a 1,200 word essay. Like, because if it's already that long, how are you possibly going to fit in the question? And if you do memorize it word for word, it's very easy to just go in and write that exact thing. But if you don't mention the question, and if you're not linking back to it, and if you're not answering it, you're not getting a band 6. That's not happening. So what I would do to practice it, another mistake that people make is they'll memorize one essay and they're like, okay, I know how to write it down. I'm just going to go on and write this on the day. And then the first time that they ever try adapting it to the question, or the first time that they ever try using that memorized essay with a question and writing it to a question, is the day of the exam. But realistically, you don't want the first time you adapt your essay to be on the day of the exam. You want to make sure that you've had practice adapting, so that you know, okay, this is how I can link this point here. This is a good gap to bring in the question. Oh, I don't really bring up the question enough here. I should do it more here. So what I would do, I'd start off by memorizing a base essay. So I would write a base essay. I wouldn't write it to any question. I just write like a really general essay. And some people like question that, like, how do you just write something like so general? But they just would have module words. I think if you have like the module words in there, and your arguments aren't going to change, like I said, it's always the same meaning of your texts. And I'll talk about it in mod B as well. It's always going to be the same meaning and the same message. You're just going to prove it to something different. So I would always memorize that and just kind of have like a solid base. And then I would go in and I would take that. I'd really perfect that base. It would be really strong. And then I would copy and paste it under different questions. So these are 2 different questions on mod A. And I'd go in another color and then I'd highlight where I was adding in the question and where I could kind of adapt it and what could kind of stay the same. Because realistically, a sentence like this, Margaret Atwood's 2016 novel Hagseed dismantles William Shakespeare's 17th century play The Tempest, creating a balanced textual conversation between the values of forgiveness and imprisonment. That is going to work for any essay ever. That will work in any question ever. And there are a lot of kind of introduction statements that will work in every single question that you ever get. So I definitely do recommend this technique if you're not really doing the best in English, or if you're a bit nervous to try memorizing. I really recommend this, only because you actually practice adapting, and it's not like you're just memorizing essay word for word and you're going to write it. You've got your memorized essay, but you're practicing, okay, how am I going to change it? And then by highlighting it, I could see, okay, I've gone like over 100 words without mentioning the question. I should mention it here. It helped me answer different questions and get question exposure, but it also just showed me spots where it's easier to add in the question. So yeah, I think it's a really good technique. I am not against memorizing essays personally, and realistically, a lot of people are doing it. A lot of people are like, no, I don't memorize my essays. A lot of people are, and that's just the truth. And of course, Nessa and the way that the paper is written tries to get away from that and limit that as much as possible. But realistically, when you know that everyone goes in with the quotes memorized, and that's not going to change, and neither are the arguments that you're making. So do I recommend memorizing it word for word? 100% no. Only because, first of all, for paper 2, like, if you can do that, I actually respect you so much, because memorizing 2 essays and a creative is like wild. Like, I have mad respect for that. But I think that memorizing your quotes technique, an analysis, and then memorizing your topic sentences and your, like, just a couple basic kind of simple introduction statements. Like, this was the same sentence here that we just read out, this one here about Margaret Atwood's. It also works for this question. And sentences like that will always work, and then you can just add in like the keywords of the question to add that in. But yeah, I think that those things make sense to memorize, and you kind of get the best of both worlds, where you're not going in fully like, I've got this full memorized prepared essay, I'm just going to write this, but you do have enough of a base so that even if the question does kind of throw you off or you don't feel the most confident with it, you've still got like a base essay. And if that base essay is like coated in the module, and that's why I say, like, have the module open next to you when you are perfecting that base essay. If you did want to try this, or if you've got like your class essay, for example, type that up, or if you already have it typed up, open it next to the module and then go through it and read and be like, okay, where can I add in mirror? Where can I add in collide? Where can I add in context? Where can I add in align? Where can I add in reimagined or reframe? And try to use those words, because even if we read these questions, reimagining them in new and varied ways reframes to shape new meaning. So both of these questions, which were past trial questions, have module words, which is why a lot of people are like, oh, you can't memorize. But because the questions are coming from the module, a lot of the times you can have some good statements prepared. That's my take on it. I don't want to get cancelled for it. I get so scared. I really hope like my English teacher never hears this, because I don't want her to know that I was doing this. But I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that, only because you are practicing adapting, and that's the most important thing. You can go in with a 20 out of 20 memorized essay, but like word for word, if you do not answer the question, you're not getting 20 out of 20. So it's up to you if you do want to do that. I think that this is a much safer option because you can actually practice that adaptability. But yeah, I'm going to stop going.